Hello and welcome to another short installment in the Conflict on Camera series, and joining me is Dr. Dan Ellin, who is going to talk about a photo from his own place of work, essentially, which is quite new. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
So tell everybody where you work.
So I work for the International Bomber Command Centre. I am the curator of the digital archive there, and I also had the honour and the pleasure of curating the exhibition that's up at the Bomber Command Centre in Lincoln. So we're trying to tell the story of the bombing war from multiple perspectives, so on both sides of in the air and on the ground, in order to try and get across the story of reconciliation and remembrance. And yeah, so since 2015, I've been working on building a digital archive. It's different to a lot of other archives because it is digital, so we don't actually have any real photos or bits of paper. But the beauty of that is all our material comes from family members or from the veterans themselves. And we get to see items that probably haven't been seen outside the family for 70 years. These are things that have been kept in shoeboxes and little tins on top of wardrobes or under beds. And it's very much history from below. It's the personal memories and the things that are important to the families. So we make digital copies of them and then give them straight back. And we're in the process of publishing all these items onto the internet, where they'll be free for anybody to download and use for their own research. We've also been carrying out oral history interviews as well, and we've recorded over 1,000 interviews with veterans and survivors of the bombing war.
So Dan, we are looking at this photo now, which shows, first glances, it's a crew in front of a bomber, of which there are many photos like this in existence. But it obviously attracted you as the one to do on this show. So tell us about it.
So yes, as you say, there are lots of photographs, very similar photographs that are like this. What attracted me to it is its context to which it came to the archive in, and it was part of a collection. So this is Warrant Officer Chesterton's crew on operations. They were at 103 Squadron at RAF Elsham Wolds, and their first operation was 12th of May 1943 to Duisburg in their Lancaster PMS, which is ED 751. They mostly flew this aircraft. If you look, you can see that there are 24 symbols on the nose, painted on the nose, indicating the operations that this aircraft has been on. It's not the crew, it's the aircraft that gets the symbols. So here in this photograph, there are 23 ops, 3 of which were to Italy, which were represented with ice cream cones rather than bombs. And I like this photograph because it is the aircraft, it is the crew and the ground crew, and they're kind of all mixed together. So it's quite hard to tell who's who because they've not all got the uniforms. So, from research for the logbook, we know that the pilot was Warrant Officer Chesterton DFT, flight engineer was Sergeant H. Ackroyd. The collection that this came in with belongs to Edward or Ted Milling, who had a BFM. He was the navigator. Somewhere in there is probably the bomb aimer, Sergeant Cave, wireless operator, Sergeant Bullock, and then 2 air gunners, Sergeant Robson and Jackson. And then amongst them are the 7 ground crew. Now, I have a bit of a thing about ground personnel because their story is quite often ignored. I mean, it's what I studied when I was doing my research for my PhD. There's a couple of things that are a bit unusual. By 43, although there were meant to be this number of ground crew working on a single aircraft, because of the expansion of the RAF, they were hard pressed. So it's quite unusual to see so many personnel there. And of course, my research shows that it was the ground crew who really got to saw the attrition rate of the air crew. If an air crew was lucky and they completed their tour of 30 operations, they could be on station for a matter of months, 4 to 6 months. I've read accounts of ground personnel who are on the same station for years. And, there's one chap, I think he was at 44 Squadron, so, it's similar to another one in Lincolnshire, who really saw the losses. So he had 10 aircraft that he lost within the space of 10 months. That's 10 aircraft and crew. And, the joke always was that the air crew borrowed the aircraft. They borrowed the kite and they were told to bring it back in one piece. So, I'm really interested in the ground crew. They had to work long hours out on the flights in the freezing cold. Lincolnshire today, it's absolutely teeming it down. It's miserable. And the stories that the ground crew tell, they'd work through the night to get an aircraft ready for an operation and then go back to the mess and have cold food and nothing else waiting for them. So their story always intrigues me. But when you interview them, when I've been to interview these people, they say, well, you don't want to talk to me, I didn't do anything. You want to talk to the guys who flew. And as well as all that, they'd work all hours on an aircraft and never knew what happen to it if it didn't return. And they quite often they talk about this sort of niggling doubt that perhaps it was something they did. Usually flak or fighters, but there was always the doubt, did I make that little tweak?
Yeah, I never thought about that. That's a really good point. Yeah, did I tighten up that thing properly? Yeah.
Yeah, and then the people wondered why these mechanics and fitters didn't really want to volunteer and become flight engineers. It's because they had an idea of what they're likely to be getting into. So yeah, I mean, this is 103 Squadron. There are a couple of really good memoirs on Charlwood's books, No Moon Tonight and Journey into Night. But there's also a chap who we interviewed who, before he passed away, he also published his memoir. It's a guy called Ted Maudsley. He was ground personnel at Elsham and he tells exactly that story. He'd sort of cycled back to his quarters, to his Nissen hut, and then he had this niggling doubt in the back of his mind, and had he put the right oxygen cylinders in the aircraft? So he hopped back on his bike and cycled back to check. So yeah, I like this photograph because it does enable me to tell these stories as well. And I've got an idea, as I say, why this photograph was taken, when this photograph was taken. Came into the IBCC archive as part of the Ted Milling collection. Collection has his logbook, some correspondence, newspaper cuttings, lots of other photographs. So he was a navigator with 103 Squadron at RAF Elsham Wolds, and then RAF Kirmington. They came together as a crew. They started flying operations at Elsham Wolds. Their first operation as a crew was as an operational training unit in Wellington. And they actually flew 19 operations with this aircraft, 23 operations with 103 Squadron. They last flew this aircraft 3rd of September to Berlin, and they flew a different aircraft on their last operation with 103, which was in 6th of September 1943. This is all coming from his logbook and the operational record books. The aircraft was lost on the night, the 5th of 6th of September, on an operation to Mannheim with another crew who all survived. They either evaded or became prisoners of war. So they did 23 operations with 103 Squadron, and then Sea Flight 103 Squadron became the nucleus of a new squadron that formed at RAF Kirmington. This was quite a usual practice for a veteran crew, as it was there, to be moved over to start another squadron. And this squadron formed at RAF Kirmington in the 20th of September 1943. So there's no way I can prove it, but I have the idea that this photograph was taken as a sort of farewell chat's photo to mark them leaving 103 Squadron. I mean, we know the aircraft was lost at the beginning of September. So, and there from the logbook, we know when he last flew that aircraft and when the aircraft was lost. So I believe that this was sort of taken as a farewell memento for their time on that squadron. If we then look further at Ted Milling's logbook, it's signed off by the CO of the squadron, and then it said, the next 3 operations in his logbook are with 166 Squadron. Then, of course, we get the thing that we often get in these logbooks. These 3 operations were written in a different handwriting. They're not the owner's handwriting. So there's this stamp, missing, death presumed. So they were flying 27th, 28th of September 1943 on an operation to Hanover, and they failed to return. And we now know it crashed in Germany with the loss of all crew. There was an 8-man crew on that night. They also had the squadron's gunnery leader, Flight Lieutenant H. McGee. Actually, no, I'm just looking at my notes. 2 of them became prisoners of war. The bomb aimer and one of the air gunners were prisoners of war. And this was their 27th operation. So they were right at the end of the tour. And of course, crews always talk about it's a bit of a jinx. It's bad luck if you have a crew photograph taken before you've actually completed the operation. So yeah, it's a bit of a sad story behind the photograph. The collection in the IBCC digital archive contains the usual sorts of telegrams and letters from the CO. And one of the other things that it has is the last letter that Ted Milling wrote to be posted to his wife, to be sent to her on the event of his death. Saturday, 20th of February 1943. To my darling wife, darling, if by any chance you do receive this letter, you'll know that I shall not be coming back. Please, darling, if it does happen, try not to let it upset you. I know it will be hard for you, for I know you love me, but be brave and remember, dear, it is for something which will last long after we have all left this earth, so please be brave. Remember, darling, you have our little girl now to think of, and she is worth all the love which you have for me, so look after her and love her for me, my dear. Life is a funny thing. All the years we've been married, incidentally, the happiest years of my life. We have had just the two of us to love each other. And now when we have someone to share our love and really complete happiness, I have to leave you. But I guess that is how it was meant to be. I'm not grumbling. My life has been happy enough. The last 6 years have been everything a man could desire. A perfect wife and pal. One whom I could give all my love and devotion to, and know that it would not be wasted. One whom I knew would return my love with just as much fervour and devotion as I could give mine. I have loved you, darling, more than anything in this world. My one regret at leaving is that I'm leaving behind the dearest wife who ever lived and the mother of my darling little girl. Well, sweetheart, I'm afraid I can't say much more. I haven't said much, but what I have comes from the bottom of my heart. And if I had my time over again, I would do exactly what I've already done, marry the sweetest little girl in the world. I must ask you again, dear, to love and take care of our little girl. Bring her up to be everything that you are, and you will have a daughter to be proud of. I must close now, dear, as it is time I was off. If I can, I will write to Mum and Dad and John. Just in case I can't manage it, give them all my love. Tell them I am sorry for any sorrow or worries I may have brought them, and this is from my heart. I think they are the finest parents a man could have, and I only hope that I go worthy of the love and devotion they have given me. Tell John to take care of himself, and I think he is the finest brother and pal anyone could have. He's a grand lad, and I wish him all the luck in the world. Goodbye, darling. Until we meet again, all my love forever. From your ever-loving husband, Ted.
Wow, I'm lost for words, really. Wow, what a letter. So in your work with the archive, I mean, how common are those sorts of letters?
Yeah, we've got a handful of them. I mean, these sorts of things are really precious. We have put together tags in the archive. So in the event of my death, letter is a tag, and that brings all these sorts of things together. But we've only got half a dozen, I think.
Because I mean, I know a lot of letters that ended up being the last letter, but
Yes.
not necessarily written as the last letter, because there is a distinct difference, isn't there?
Yeah, and going back to my work on the ground personnel, it was their unpleasant task of going through the possessions of people and posting these sorts of letters, and checking that there wasn't anything that was going to get sent back to family that would be upsetting or inappropriate. But yeah, they're hard to read, but it's a perfect example of the things that we have in the archive that are at this personal level. It's got all the ideas of life and love and emotion and what it was like. It's the total odds to what you might see in an operational record book.
Well, exactly, yeah. And we British do tend to be a little bit less emotive than perhaps some of our other allies in World War II. And to have a letter that's a bit more powerful like that is something, isn't it? And I think also just that reminder that we all need, that Bomber Command is doing a long job for a long time, and it's not just dam busters, it's not just the glamorous raids that get all the attention of the TV series. There's a huge operational list of things happening year after year and people are dying day after day, and we don't always focus on that. We do tend to focus on those famous ones.
Yeah, indeed, and that's another thing. Yeah, we're telling these stories that haven't been told.
So thank you very much for joining us, Dan. That was a great show. So thank you very much. And we would love to have you back on World War II TV again in some shape or form, either talking about the archive or the photo or collection or something, but we'll have you back on again. So thanks for joining us.